Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the January meeting of the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition's Housed 802 Community Meeting Program. Before we get started, we're just going to do a brief round of introductions with folks in the call right now. So I'm going to go first and then popcorn it over, and I just ask after you go if you can please popcorn it someone else's way in the call. So my name is Justin Cersek, and for those who don't know, I'm one of the America Vistas at the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition, who does resident engagement. My preferred pronouns are he, him. I'm originally from New Jersey, as I had mentioned to some folks earlier in the call, but right now I'm living in Chittenden County in Essex Junction. And affordable housing is incredibly important to me, not just because I'm affected personally as a young person just getting started on my career, but also because I firmly believe that it's the cornerstone to the American dream and economic opportunity for everyone. So next, I'll popcorn over to David.
Hi, I'm David Martens, he, him pronouns. I'm originally from, I'm the director at VAHC, the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition. I'm originally from Rhode Island, but currently, or I should say now, I live in Winooski, Vermont, in Chittenden County. And why affordable housing is important to me? Well, I mean, I took this role because I think that I worked for a number of years in advocacy in Rhode Island with the recovery community, the LGBT community, and housing always was a thing. It's a thing with every population that I've ever worked with because it impacts all of us. And I really and truly think that if we have a home that we're happy in, that we can afford, that's half the battle. And so for as much time as we spend fighting for other causes, all of which are important, don't get me wrong, if we can get this housing thing right, we're halfway there. So, and it's great to be here. I passed it on to Liz.
Hi, everyone. My name is Liz Curry, and I use she, her pronouns. I live in Burlington, and I have been working on homelessness and affordable housing issues since 1985 when I got out of UVM, and it always sounds like a longer and longer time ago. So I actually started my work career as a carpenter, but homelessness was upon us. So there was a small group of community action advocates and Sisters of Mercy and city employees who got together, and I volunteered to write a grant for the family shelter in Burlington, and I was on my way. I come to this work from a place that just on a fundamental values level am opposed to a system that creates winners and losers based on real estate and wealth building opportunities that are completely shut out anyone who's not white and middle class. So those are my values. And then I worked for the Housing and Conservation Board, and then I worked for about 15 years for an organization that merged with Champlain Housing Trust. So the two, Burlington Community Land Trust and the other organization I worked for, merged. So I've been doing that. I took a little break and worked in transit and energy efficiency, and now I'm consulting for affordable housing, working with great projects and clients around the state, including manufactured home parks, homeless shelter, and a fun village economic development general store in East Calais that's going to have affordable apartments on the top. So I appreciate being asked to come tonight and talk about the Housing and Conservation Board.
Thank you.
I'll ping to Michael. You just showed up. And yeah.
Hi. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael. I'm a student at UVM, he, him pronouns. And yeah, so I guess I'm interested in housing in a number of ways. I've seen a lot of people at my time at UVM, go through the struggles of not being able to get out of the housing situation, and just struggling with interesting housing situations, like people who I had an apartment where the towel used to freeze to the wall in the winter because it was so poorly insulated, and just being interested in climate change and sort of land use patterns, seeing how the effects of shortages of housing push people to commute, longer and longer distances, and drive up the combined cost of housing and transportation that makes Vermont a less affordable place for everyone. So thanks. To Buster, I guess.
Hello. Why has housing affected me? One of many reasons. And why I talk about it, many reasons. Not only because it affects me, it affects some people around me. Affordability, and being so rural, and some of the policies in place, and some of the challenges that face the agriculture community differently than other communities, and all those challenging, and they affect everyone around me. Housing, whether they're an immigrant from another country, whether they're from another country seasonally, or whether it's another farm worker down the road, or whatever. It's all affected us because we are farm workers, and our challenges are differently. We don't get on a many of us don't get unemployment benefits if we ever need them, and no one likes unemployment benefits. But when a farm goes out of business and we can't get unemployment benefits, unlike manufacturing and other places, that's challenging. And then if you live on a farm and have farm housing and lose your job, there's the farm housing law. So that's challenging. And those kinds of things have left some folks homeless, not everyone. So during those times, you have to have a bank account to protect yourself, be able to move your family and move yourself. And the challenging is gotten more great. So we really need to address all those challenges that affect everyone in agriculture. And that's what I like to talk about. And that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you, Buster. Why don't we popcorn it now over to Lisa?
Hi, I'm Lisa Mr. Mundino, and I use she, hers pronouns. I live in Warren, Vermont, and I have worked in housing off and on. Actually, I worked for the Central Vermont Community Land Trust a long time ago when it was a fledgling organization. It's now become Downstreet Housing and Community Development. And I work for the Family Center of Washington County now as in the Family Supportive Housing Program. And what that means is I work with people who are homeless, and families, actually, families who are homeless, and then I stay with them once they're housed to work on, gaining the skills or doing the things that are necessary to be able to preserve their housing. Why is it important to me? Oh, I guess it just is. I see how important having a home is to folks. Currently, I have many people who were homeless but now have stable housing. And a lot of it is due to our partner organization, Downstreet, which has really, done a lot of work to make apartments available. I still have 3 families who have been living in a motel in Barry for over a year, and they can't find anything. They just can't find anything, and it's kind of heartbreaking. Some folks have disabilities, some folks work, some folks have lost their housing through no fault of their own. Most of the time that's the case. So it's really good work to do, and I wanted to come tonight to just listen to other folks who are involved in the work. I will also say that I'm also a landlord. I have an apartment in my house. I have a little building next door with 2 apartments, and it's important to me to have a good community here and to be able to fix the place and have it to be a good place for people to live. Has everybody gone? No, Pamela hasn't.
Hello. Well, I live in Winooski. I have been in Vermont a little over 2 years at this phase. I've lived in Vermont in the past, mainly because I have worked on sort of an academic, very part-time roles. But what concerns me about affordable housing is the imbalance of the cost of living for most people who are employed and what is quote unquote termed affordable housing, which can be more like $1,400 or even more. And then the narrow guidelines that sometimes limit the ability to get involved with subsidized housing programs, and then the length of time that takes. And it's almost like it can sort of limit the continuity of housing, because if you earn a little bit more money, which maybe is desirable to be more independent, the gap between affording a market value apartment or gaining access to potential ownership in the future, there's a big gap to fall through there that makes it really, really difficult, because I think it jeopardizes the sense of gaining further independent employability, and makes puts a lid on that. And then because it jeopardizes, then like I say, the ability to afford or even if it's available, I guess. And the other thing is what that means in communities, to have people having housing, having their work, joining those things together in a way that doesn't jeopardize more independent financial livelihood. And unfortunately, I am going to have to step off fairly soon, but I was hoping to get a sense of this and hope maybe that there'll be more of these that I will be involved in.
Well, thank you, Pamela, for being here and for speaking. this meeting will be recorded, so it will be made available on the Affordable Housing Coalition's YouTube page. And we're also hoping to take snippets of some of the presentations and put them on our Facebook and Instagram. And definitely we'll be looking to try and do this monthly as well. So
All right, well, I'll keep an eye out on that.
Thank you so much, Pamela. Nice to have you here. And thank you everyone else for introducing yourselves as well and talking about why affordable housing is so meaningful for you and for many other Vermonters. So as we continue on with the meeting, I want to give just a brief background of why we're here and why the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition is hosting this series of community meetings. Originally, this started as a series of in-person community meetings this past October in Washington County, with the hope that we would grow this #House802 movement across Vermont county by county to really bring folks to the table and incorporate them into our coalition. Folks, residents that aren't necessarily at the table already. Unfortunately, COVID-19 and the Omicron variant really made us take a turn in that, which is why we're here right now, starting these community meetings over Zoom. And by virtue of that, we're no longer just in Washington County, but statewide for all Vermonters who would wish to join us. With that as well, and with the legislative session started in Montpelier at the State House, VAHC is putting forth 3 new objectives, 3 goals that we want to accomplish through these community meetings. The first of that is education. So at each community meeting, the coalition will be providing presentations from coalition members on 2 different legislative priorities per meeting that the coalition is working on and that are being discussed by legislators at the State House. And this won't only be just general information about what these policy proposals or these funding proposals are about, but how it will immediately affect you as a Vermonter, as a Vermont resident, a Vermont renter, Vermont homeowner, or someone looking to rent or to own a home. And also an actual live-time, like real-time update on how things are going at the State House with this legislative priority, what our representatives are saying about it, what is the likelihood that it's going to pass, and just what is the latest update on that piece of legislation. The second objective is to host community discussion, to provide a roundtable, to ask questions about these legislative issues, and to collaborate on how the coalition and the larger community, all of us together, can collectively fight the housing crisis all together. And lastly, the third objective is advocacy. So these meetings will also provide a space for all of us to work together and really use our individual power to affect change when it comes to the housing situation in Vermont. And the possibilities are endless, from letter writing and postcarding our representatives to talking about best tips, best practices for what's the best way to write a letter to the editor, to even organizing group meetings or legislative days with our representatives at the State House to talk about our experiences with affordable housing, what it means to us, and also specific certain issues that we think will do a lot to help out the situation and help a lot of Vermonters, including ourselves. With that, the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition is incredibly excited to incorporate members of the community in a way that we haven't before, to make sure that we end the housing crisis and we ensure that all in the 802, all in Vermont, can be housed safely, adequately, and affordably. So with that is our agenda for the rest of the evening. So we're going to start off with a brief little icebreaker, just so that we can get to know each other and kind of humanize this a little bit more, so it's not just us staring at the Zoom screen. After that, we'll move on to our legislative priority presentations. Tonight, we'll have 2 presentations on 2 of VAHC's many legislative priorities. The first one is about rental housing safety, which is going to be covered by David Martens, our executive director. And then secondly, is information about the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board and funding of this organization a presentation which will be done by Liz Curry, who is the principal of Common Wind Solutions. After that, we'll take a brief break so we're not too zoomed out, and then move on to group discussion, and then what these community meetings, what the coalition, what this group, what we want to do moving forward from here tonight. So to move on to an icebreaker, I know that we're already a month into 2022, so the new year is kind of a little old by now, but I know that there's a lot of things to look forward to. So I wanted to ask all of you if you could just briefly share what is something that you are personally excited about and why. And I'll go and share first that my roommate, who is currently deployed with the National Guard to Kosovo, has adopted a dog while overseas and is going to be shipped back before she is. So I'm going to be fostering a 7-month-old corgi puppy for a few months until my roommate gets back. So with that, I'll popcorn over to David.
Well, I had a similar icebreaker at another meeting this week, and I shared at that I have this deep down hope that I'm going to celebrate the end of my first Vermont legislative session this summer, hopefully by going to Vegas. And so that is something that I'm very much looking forward to in 2022, sitting by the pool in Vegas, hopefully on the hottest day of the year, and just baking in the sun, and I just can't wait. So hopefully that is on the docket. Liz?
It's hard for me to think or look much beyond the next 2 or 3 months. So with that in mind, last night, my husband and I just made plans with our older son and his girlfriend to get together. They live in Providence, Rhode Island, and we're going to get together in southern Vermont at the end of the month. So I'm really looking forward to seeing them. Lisa?
I have to keep finding the unmute button because it's noisy here with dogs and cats. What am I? Oh, I'm looking forward to going to visit my sister in Delaware, which is, and maybe even going to the beach. It's a lot warmer down there. But you know, she's a sister that I'm closest to, so I'm looking forward to that. Oh, is Pamela still here? Maybe not.
No, she jumped off the call.
Oh, how about Buster?
Hello, thank you. Me, I'm looking forward to upcoming news on the progress on the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board work on farm worker housing, both of those two. And then I'm also looking forward to, because I'm into agriculture, 2 different things. My brother family and whatnot, they're goat farmers, and they came out with a new line of goat jerky, so I'm excited about going and trying some of that, you know. And then the other thing, and right around the corner, we have sugaring season, and me as a Vermonter and our neighbors in New York, you know, and all around here, who doesn't love maple syrup, you know, and getting out there and drilling the holes, hammering in the tap, and then sampling the end result, you know. I look forward to that, and I haven't done that in a long time, but I have the last 2 years, and I'm waiting for that sap to run. So I don't know who's next. Thank you.
I think I might be the last one. Well, I'm excited about longer days and, you know, the end of this wave of COVID, hopefully. That'll least the winding down. And then also, I think there's a lot to look forward to for this legislative session. So looking forward to your updates.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, it seems that the cold weather is on everybody's mind. And Lester, I do have to say, being originally from New Jersey, even though we have a lot of great blueberries and cranberries down south, I'm very jealous of Vermont's maple syrup. Okay, so with that, we can move on to the main event of tonight, our two presentations on our legislative priorities that we're talking about tonight. So first of all, we're going to talk about the rental housing safety bill, which is known right now as Senate Bill 210. And David Martens is going to take the reins on that one. David, as he had mentioned earlier in his introduction, is the new executive director of the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition and brings over a decade of nonprofit and inclusion leadership to the table. Some of this work includes addiction recovery, pastoring an inclusive faith community, and participating in various interfaith advocacy organizations and movements. So David, please take it away.
Well, hi everybody. I don't have slides because that's not how I roll. So so instead this will be more of a conversation, and I invite you to interrupt me at any time if I need to clarify something. But essentially, I'm sure those of you who follow the legislative activity already are well aware of the rental housing safety bill. Last year it was known as S79 or Senate Bill 79, and the bill was pertaining to moving. So currently in the state of Vermont, if you are a renter, you live in an apartment, and there's a problem, there's an issue related to health or safety in your apartment, and you call your landlord and he doesn't do anything about it, where do you go from there? Currently, you go to the town health officer, who comes and does an inspection, and the process is handled from there. Unfortunately, the town health officers are frequently, so those are run by the towns, by the municipalities. And so depending where you live, kind of depends on what kind of resources that town health officer or THO might have or might not have. Depending where you live, that depends. Maybe they're a volunteer. Maybe they're deeply under-resourced. In many cases, they're another city employee, so the chief of whatever other office who does double duty as the THO. So there's no consistency across the state, and these roles are often, there's a lot of overturn in these roles. And so the big thing S79 wanted to do was transition this role from the municipalities to the state through the Department of Fire Safety. This was going to require hiring people to do these inspections. And so sort of killing two birds with one stone, if you will, the bill also put forward putting into place a rental registry. And so if you were a landlord, you would register your rental units with this registry. You would pay a $35 per unit per year fee. The money from that fee statewide would go towards hiring 5 inspectors to take over this work. And it would also give us a clear picture of where the rental housing is. We all know that there's not any. We all know that there's problems, but a lot of this stuff is anecdotal, and it's very hard to make progress when it's all anecdotal. So this would give us hard numbers to really be able to move forward, do more effective planning at the municipal level, and so on. And finally, this bill included policy around the use of funds for the VHIP program and for the revolving loan fund. Well, it ended up being passed through the House and the Senate after a lot of work. By the way, the folks have been working on this legislation for, I don't even know how long. Liz, is it accurate to say more than a decade?
In various forms, it's been on the VAHC's agenda for more than a decade.
And I know poor Sarah Carpenter. I mean, she's not going to know what to do when this thing is finally resolved. She's been working on this like her life work.
Biggest champion.
God bless her. And so this, so the bill was finally, and made it all the way to the governor's desk, and the governor vetoed it. The reasons he gave, sort of by summary, you can see the exact reasons in his veto letter, which is available online, but he said that he would support a rental housing registry only for those buildings which exceeded 2 dwelling units available for rent for more than 120 days a year. This idea kind of became known as his concern for the mom and pops. So the idea that, well, so if someone's got this, small, 1 unit or so available that they just sort of rent out here and there to make some extra money, they're not really a full-time landlord per se, that they're going to be dissuaded from doing this, and that would have negative impact. He also claimed that changing the health and safety inspections from the THOs to the state would no longer make that complaint-based process a reality, and that now he claimed it would be mandatory inspections because it would fall within this statewide governance. And he felt that 5 new inspectors would be insufficient, and this would result in a future, as he put it, expansion of the bureaucracy. He did, however, support the VHIP and the revolving loan fund and said, we'll fund those with the budget. And he vetoed the bill. Well, this creates a few problems. That first of all, now we have money with no policy behind it. Nothing in statute that governs how this money is used in this program, which is a very dangerous precedent and kind of just not how we do things, right? And so that was, one problem. And then, of course, just that this bill got vetoed, right? So S210, or Senate Bill 210, was put in this year. And I'm not really going to go over it point by point because it's the same, pretty much, as S79, except that it addresses those concerns brought up by the governor by simply reiterating that the inspection process would still be complaint driven, that it would not be just a statewide mandatory. The advocates and Senator Cersek, who we've been working with, conceded about a few of those exemptions from the registry, super short-term rentals, the so-called mom and pops, particularly folks who, so if you're renting a room in your 3-bedroom apartment, well, the landlord lives there too, so he's going to probably keep it safe and healthy, so to try to, allow for more exemptions, but being realistic about making sure that those units that we're trying to capture are still going to be able to be captured. And just kind of saying, well, we can still adjust the number of hired inspectors, and that number was determined by a study that the administration seemed to be on board with at the time. That was prior to my arrival here, so that's kind of hearsay by me sharing that, but I understand that to be the case. So this S210 has now begun its journey through the legislature. Most recently, it was introduced in the Senate Committee on Economic Development. It passed, was voted out, and it went through Senate Finance, which was voted out 6-1 today, and now it moves on to Appropriations, which should be its last stop before going to the Senate floor, and ultimately moving on to the House. I think, though, that we are going to face the same problem of the THOs. The governor does not seem to want to transfer that authority from the THOs to the state, and so that's going to continue to be a point of contention. And advocates of the bill are not going to let it go because that's the crux of the whole thing. So, and we can't let it go because it's a problem. Michael referenced earlier people hanging things on the wall because there's no insulation. Like what? People can't live like this. And so the whole point of this bill is to improve rental health and safety. So we're going to keep beating that drum. Also included in the legislation is the language around those dollars that are already being put out through the budget. In fact, 40 municipalities received grants Oh, I'm sorry, that's another bill. Sorry.
Mhm.
But the money's already out and flowing, and so, you know, the language is in there. So ongoing battle, and it's interesting because, you know, we tried to reach out to the town health officers, and when you think about the state of Vermont, and I think this is going to be a problem in a lot of legislative issues. You think about the state of Vermont, there's a big difference between Burlington, St. Johnsbury, random town in the mountains. So I don't know. I don't even know the names of all the towns because I'm new here. But you know, there's a big difference in all these places. You know, you look at some tiny town like Timoth. You know, does the THO in Timoth ever get calls about rental housing safety? No, because there's probably not many rental units in Timoth to begin with. And so when a bill like this comes through, you reach out to the THOs and say, well, we want you to show your feelings towards it. All these small towns, these small rural towns, this whole issue is so foreign to them that it's really hard to get them fired up about it. In some cities and towns, there's a pretty solid system in place. And so they're saying, well, we don't need this because it's fine where we are, which leaves us with the THOs who are saying, we need help and this isn't working. You know, the state needs to take this over. So, you know, Vermont's a place where things are so different town to town to town that it's really hard to cast that net that really captures the whole state. But we're doing our best, and we're just going to keep fighting for S210 as it makes its journey towards the governor's desk.
Yeah, David, I just wanted to add a couple things. Like Vermont has a lot of manufactured home parks, and I think even if, you know, a community doesn't have a lot of multifamily property, chances are there's a manufactured home park. And the health officer, I mean, a lot of manufactured home park owners own, you know, mobile homes in the park and rent them out. And that, I think the health officers do get called, or people don't have any recourse. And you know, everybody here has probably experienced this, where Vermont has a lot of small towns where everybody knows each other. And I have a project, I'm working on a project now where, you know, the health officer is, you know, very much steeped in the town family heritage. So there's like dynamics between families that go way back, and the health officers are not exempt from that. So when they get called, it's like, oh, well, that's just so-and-so's family, you know, because they always complain, or they're always bullies or whatever. It's like, you don't have this professional team of people who are trained to like stay above the fray of personal dynamics. And when you have a health officer who's involved in the personal family dynamics of a town, it's just not a system that's going to work for the benefit of people who need it the most. So like that whole, you know, I think the governor's just afraid of bureaucracy, but on the other hand, like the Agency of Natural Resources, water didn't used to be regulated until EPA regulated it and said to the state, you have to have public water testing. And so Agency of Natural Resources developed, you know, regional water specialists. What's the same idea? Like, we need regional health officers for the exact same reason. And, you know, I don't think there's any real argument that will sway the governor, but if there's, you know, a parallel example of a health and safety issue that was professionalized, it was regulated, it's, you know, going to be public water that came down from the feds.
Mhm.
And I think that there is this is just my opinion, but I think that there is this sort of unspoken thing of landlords versus tenants, and that there's a, you know, the landlords hold the power. I'm a renter. My landlord holds the power, right? And we look at this legislation like just cause eviction, which is one of our priorities and something that we're very much involved in. The recovery residence bill that recently continues its fight, or sort of any of these bills that have to do with tenancy and landlord, sort of immediately we see these two sides, and who sides with which. And I like to think that at VAHC our priority really is the tenant, because our priority is people. We're the affordable housing coalition, and so our concern is that people are housed, and that people are housed in safe places, in decent housing, that's affordable and of their choice. And so, I think that that there's this big concern about, well, will a landlord, if there's all this, all these expectations upon a landlord to have to register and so on, that's going to dissuade them and dissuade them from wanting to put units on the market. Conveniently enough, we have a housing crisis, so it's very easy to say, well, we need these units, which we do. That's very true. But one can't help but wonder who's got friends who are landlords, So I don't know. It is what it is, but I think that there's also a perspective of, it's frequently been said in a lot of the meetings that I'm in, every other business, we know who all the construction workers are. We know who all the barbers are. We know who all the tattoo artists are. Why can't we know who all the landlords are? And it's also their benefit. I mean, something comes up like with in the hurricane that passed through and brought so much damage, coronavirus. There were these resources that were available for landlords. We didn't really have a way to reach out to all of them at once. And so this is something that really is good for everyone. And I think really kind of vitally important to a vitally important piece of the bigger solution.
Is there anything on the national level, or are there any states that have similar we've been advocating for this for 10 years, and are there any states that are already doing something similar to this that could be used as an example? I'm just curious. Like maybe I don't know, maybe Iowa has a similar law. It's like they have rental laws in place at the state level already that could be an example. Any ideas on that? I don't know.
To my knowledge, there are a lot of cities and a lot of counties across the country that have rental registries. My understanding is that none have it at a statewide level, but that they do have it at the county level and at the city level. And frankly, a county in one of these other states, probably the same population as ours. We only have 500,000 people. So is it literally the same in other places? No. Is it comparable? Absolutely.
Thank you. I was just curious. Sometimes examples from other locations and their successes can be helpful in some cases. Huh.
And I think that and I know I'm going over my time and I'm now cut into Liz's time, but so I'll wrap it up. But I will say that the housing problem here is so complex. It is, each day in this role, I'm learning more and more and more just how complex it is. And between this just housing stock that's just ancient, these houses were built that are just so old, right? We have things like Act 50 that has a lot of wonderful points to it, but it provides some constriction in the development of new housing. We have We have the duplication of things. So, you know, you want to put up a house, you're going to pass all these inspections and permits and stuff at the city level, and then you do it again for the state. And contractors say, we're not spending all this money. And all this takes time. And people, we do not live in a culture that values things taking time, right? And so we have the skyrocketing cost of things, you know, with the has been dubbed the COVID refugees, kind of fleeing to Vermont, buying property sight unseen off the internet. So now all the prices are driven up, and there's nothing to stop a landlord from charging $2,500 a month if he wants. There's nothing, you know, we hear about houses being sold for $50,000 over the asking price and more. So like, we have all these dynamics. I mean, it's just you know, we're in a point where someone who makes just a decent salary and kind of just has a standard, I don't know how to describe it, but it's middle income, you know, can't afford to buy a home. Not only can they just not afford it, like everyone in the world, I'm sure, wishes they paid less for their housing, but this is like it's literally not within reach when it should be. And that driving affordability gap, it just inflates, right? And so we got to find ways to take pressure off the market. So it's such a complicated thing. It's so many layers. There's no one magic bullet. Myself, I have a good job. I make a decent wage, and I drive for Uber part-time. Like, it's just kind of the way of life in Vermont. And so it's such a complicated issue. And so I just would encourage us, as we listen to and as we talk tonight, and if you come to more of these, or if you watch on the news and hear conversation about the housing, you know, housing bills and the housing problem, bear in mind there is no one solution because it is such a complicated problem. So, and I would pass the baton to Liz.
Sure. Thank you so much, David, for your thoughtful presentation. So I'll move on to Liz Curry's presentation about the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board and what full statutory funding of that is and what it will do. Liz is the principal of Common Land Solutions and brings 25 years of experience to the table in consultations regarding to affordable housing and equitable community development. So Liz, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to share my screen with your presentation. And if you want, just let me know when you want me to move forward or move back in the slides.
Okay, thanks, Justin. And while he's putting up the slides, which I do use slides because it's the only time I get to do anything that resembles art. So like one of my favorite things is choosing the layout of a PowerPoint presentation, because I was going to major in art and I got really off track. So this is like my art. I know Michael has a question up in the chat. And Michael, the answer is yes. So that might be something David could work with you on afterwards, but there is that data is very much available, in fact, through the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board and the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. So the answer is yes. And Buster, that was a great question about like examples of where a rental housing bill has worked in the past. I know the District of Columbia has a rental housing safety code, which is not a state, but it's a district. And the main point I want to make is that the reason why, like Burlington has one too, but the reason why I think in Vermont we are able, when we succeed big, a lot of the reason why we succeed big is because regular people get involved and tell their stories. And that's a lot of how the Housing and Conservation Trust Fund started. So in this slide presentation, I wasn't sure of the audience, so I just kind of covered the whole gamut. So it doesn't really get to the point till the end, which is what people need to know for Legislative Day, for that coalition Legislative Day. And Lisa, I knew I remembered your name, and I didn't know why, but I do remember when you worked at CRCLT. Yeah, when it was Central Vermont, CVCLT. So you're familiar with this whole process of, and Buster, you probably are too, of going into the state and advocating as a citizen, as a resident, or as, you know, a municipal official or whatever. But a lot of the reason why the trust fund was created is because of regular people telling their stories. So you want to go to the first slide, Justin? So I just wanted to kind of contextualize this by just sharing the conditions that gave rise to the Housing and Conservation Trust Fund were the economic dynamics in the 1980s. And surprisingly, or not surprisingly, many of them resemble what we're seeing today. We had a very rural economy with very few major employers outside of Chittenden County. That has changed for the better, but our agricultural economy has been weakening for decades. And in the 80s, we really lost a lot of farms. About 3,000 farms were gone by the 80s. A lot of that was because we were seeing the changes to the tax code on profit gain from real estate. And also in the 80s, there was high inflation, high interest rates, farm subsidies. I'm old enough to remember when I lived in DC, the farmers came to DC with their tractors and drove around the mall because they were protesting the lack of subsidies. So it was a bad time for farmers. And nationwide, there was a lot of kind of disenfranchisement of rural communities, and people like in the global south were moving to the cities, and the service economy was coming up because of international trade agreements. So there were huge economic shifts in the 80s. The biggest one, though, I think, was when President Reagan changed the tax code, and speculation became rampant because that gain was no longer being taxed at a high level. You want to go to the next slide? So along those lines, Vermont was getting a lot of attention because we were seeing huge speculative flipping and development that was really getting everyone's attention. And this is just a snapshot from an article that was written in 1988 called The Selling of Vermont, and that's exactly what it was. Next slide. So this is a long quote by the former Lieutenant Governor Dean, but he really hit the nail on the head. And this sounds like the pandemic economy when people from New York, Boston, Philly saw Vermont as a bargain, and they've been buying real estate left and right. And, you know, people who are born here, which is no longer appropriate, can't afford to live here. Teachers, librarians, and now we're seeing, you know, all of our neighbors from working, you know, 1 shift or 2 shift at service level jobs up to still teachers and librarians not being able to afford to buy a home, not being able to afford, like Pamela was saying, you know, the gap is just wider and wider. So you want to go to the next slide. And we saw homelessness reaching an unprecedented level after, again, you know, kind of this march to empty out buildings for various reasons, but mainly for profit. We lost a lot of single room occupancy housing. Deinstitutionalizing people was something that advocates for people with mental disabilities supported, but there were no subsidies or there was no safety net for them in housing once they were outside of the institutions. And then again, real estate speculation culminating with these long-time federally subsidized mortgages that came with rental subsidies for private landlords to develop large apartment complexes. A lot of those mortgages were basically due in the 80s and started to be paid off, and those landlords started converting those places to condominiums. In Vermont, the one that really sparked a lot of the tenants' rights movement and a lot of the housing land trust movement was Northgate, which is in Burlington. So that is its own story about how we saved it from being converted to condominiums. Next slide. So the trust fund was created in response to that kind of land speculation and disenfranchisement of both farmers, tenants, and other people who didn't have access to the housing market. All of those pressures just kind of, this is like a once in a lifetime thing, but it really brought together low income and tenant advocates with farmers and land conservation advocates. And everybody was saying, Vermont's not going to be affordable to regular people if we don't do something. And the way that kind of momentum built was that people who were feeling the impacts came and told their stories. And they told their stories to the legislature. So you would have in one room farmers and low-income tenants who were being threatened with displacement telling their stories in the same room. And that was a very powerful experience. So there were also a number of legislators then who came out of, low income and legal aid and social services backgrounds, and that really helped to convince the governor to create, you can go to the next slide, to create the transfer tax that was used to fund the trust fund. So all of that happened in the '87. And when the transfer tax was created, the statute that was written set up formulas for providing that money primarily to at least half of that to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Trust Fund. And then other parts of the money go to other uses. But that never happened. That 50% never actually was realized. Since its creation, we have on an annual basis governors that recommend a lot less, or the legislature will decide, well, we really need that money for something else, and so we're going to let you guys use the state bonding capacity and use the bond revenue to build housing, which isn't as favorable an approach for a number of reasons. You have to pay it back for one thing. So most of the time, VHCB receives about half of what it's supposed to get. There were a couple of years when we did achieve full funding, but it was not sustained. And so every year we're missing the opportunity to produce like 20 to 30 homes. Over 10 years, we've lost opportunities to produce between 2,000 and 3,000 units. And imagine where we would be now if we had, that much more housing. So now it sounds like, and also I think in other times, there were a lot of out-of-state buyers and there was a lot of property transfers. And so the tax that's available now from those transfers is way higher than they predicted. It's actually $20 million higher than what was projected because no one saw this kind of pandemic real estate frenzy happen. So the next slide shows kind of this information in graphic form. The one on the left is called the alligator mouth of VHCB funding, where you can see like that just the gap has widened over time between what it's supposed to get and what it actually gets. And then there's a table that shows the history, and you can see that in the third column is the statutory share, and the fourth column is what has actually been received. And almost every year it's half, except for 2 or 3 years there. So lastly, the last slide basically just hits some points. If we did have full funding, a lot of the questions came up, a lot of the points you raised, Buster, about like all of these needs, homelessness, senior housing, transitional housing, farm worker housing, even community building, what Pamela was saying about it's so hard to build communities because people aren't stable. Our neighbors don't stay in one place anymore because they can't afford the rent increase, or the conditions are bad, or they're overcrowded, or there's a number of issues. So that constant turnover makes it really hard to build stable neighborhoods and communities. And we would be able to have a healthier housing market in general. Right now, the Housing and Conservation Board has to set priorities for their funding every year because they can't do all of that. We haven't had home ownership opportunities created after the foreclosure crisis. That kind of killed a lot of starter home, like condominium development, for reasons that have to do with the secondary market. But if we had had more money, we'd have the money to mitigate the impacts of the secondary market regulations that killed condos. And that was a vital kind of rung of the ladder. There's kind of this image of a housing ladder of tenure that one of our gurus kind of invented that concept. And that ladder produces, opportunities for people to increase their security and their affordability and their tenure as you go up the ladder. And we've lost, that ladder is broken. So if we had, for every million of funding, at least 20 to 30 homes can be created of various types. And that's a very rough average. So if the trust fund had 10 million more dollars, that's a huge impact in small rural communities. And what I started the presentation with was just the notion that when residents go to the State House, and when anybody goes to the State House and tells their story, it is so powerful. And it's few coalitions that offer this opportunity to get involved like this. And there's tons of people who have information and talking points and can help people go to the State House and talk to their legislators, or it can happen all year round. But every time someone who's affected by the housing market writes a letter or tells their story, it has a huge ripple effect. And the other thing about that is that everybody should know, when a housing person tells their story, there's a farmer telling their story too. And that's what's so unique and powerful about the Housing and Conservation Trust Fund. The other thing I kind of glossed over was that when the statute was created, the designers of it were aware that both the land conservation movement, but also the housing trust, the housing trust fund movement, both of them have their roots in the Black community in the South, where when Black families were disenfranchised from their land, they created land trust models. And there are examples throughout the South of communal land ownership among Black communities. The one that was formalized, I think, in the 70s was the New Hope Land Trust in Georgia. And so our model has its roots in the Black community, as well as borrowing from First Nations notion of, communal land, and not no one can really own land. We use it and we pass it on to the next generation. And the way that gets kind of locked into the statute is that all of the funding that comes out of the trust fund carries with it a covenant that's going to go on the property that it's funding. And that covenant is either going to require it to be affordable for generation after generation. It can't be sold back to the private market, and the price that can be charged for it is restricted. And farms, those conservation easements, are going to be there forever. That also applies to historic properties and recreational lands and endangered land, all of which is funded by the trust fund. So that perpetual covenant is the mechanism that allows us, when we invest this money, to create kind of a public infrastructure of housing and land that will be available for future generations, just like when we build a municipal water system. No, we're not going to sell that. It's going to be available for everybody forever. So that's all I had, because I just wanted to leave time for questions, and I probably blew through a lot of information, but would be happy to talk about any of it. And Lisa, maybe if your video were off, it might help your connection. Does that work for you? Sometimes that works for me. Not that we don't want to see you.
Right.
I did have one question.
Okay, I'll try that.
Yeah, we can hear you. You're not frozen in.
Okay. So, I guess I have a lot of questions. I think I remember there was an advocate I worked with, and what she said, I'm thinking what David said, and it's very complicated, and there is not just one solution. There are many different tactics. But what Ginny McGrath used to say was the market doesn't work for everyone. It just doesn't, and it's working less and less and less. Where I live, you know, people don't understand that there are folks that are dealing with homelessness right around the corner. Because for many reasons, a lot of what everybody has told me is, well, my landlord is selling the place. They're going to do Airbnb. You know, as a landlord, I can kind of understand, like, how am I going to meet my bills? You know, I'm a small mom and pop, but what I've noticed here in my neighborhood is that there are 10 houses down the street where neighbors used to live. And now they've been sold to people who, these little houses as second homes. And they're lovely people. I'm not saying that they're bad, but, you know, we don't have a neighborhood. You know, it hurts the community that the folks who work here can't live here. But that was more of a statement than a question.
And that's a great statement. I mean, that's the kind of statement that if you took that to the legislature, like when they hear that statement, one person after another saying that, it makes a difference. They're hearing that our neighborhoods are disappearing, our communities are disappearing.
Right. And I just love that. I mean, I sat through a whole presentation on homelessness, and the last time we were able to meet at the legislature for I think it was Homelessness Awareness Day, but you know, it was a whole day. And the only thing that that really seemed to perk people up and make them listen is when folks came in and told their personal stories. It just, I mean, it was just amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I watched that. Oh, you mean the hearing that happened in November or sometime?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was, it might have been a little bit long. It was when people could actually go and say, it must have been
Yeah.
just before
Before
COVID
that.
broke.
I watched that. It was incredibly powerful and very sad.
Yeah, yeah. So I
it-
think
it
we
just-
all can contribute.
Yeah, because of that hearing, they extended the hotel voucher program, the hotel stays.
Uh-huh.
Well, thank you so much, Liz, for your presentation about VHCB and the history behind that, which is quite extensive.
I just want to throw out there that the dollar amount was, I just saw it today for this year, was like 36. I think the official adjusted number was 36,100,000 and something. And the governor's budget has 11 million.
Oh my God.
And their statutory share is 36. It's insane.
That's crazy. That's the worst it's ever been. Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of, I think that because last year, just fill everybody in, last year Vermont got all this money from the federal government because related to COVID relief, right? And so Vermont, thanks to efforts of people like Liz and other advocates, the administration and the legislation saw it fit to put a ton of this money into housing, and which they did, and that's great. The result of that is that VHCB walked away with this enormous allotment, but that was because of that federal funding. That was not meeting their statutory share. And again, only my opinion, but I think that there's perhaps some folks who look at that and say, well, we gave them all that money last year. What do they need? You know, so now this year the advocates come in and say, oh, 36 million. Why? We gave them 500 million last year, you know, and we still have all these problems. Well, 500 million or whatever crazy amount of money it was is a mere down payment on solving this problem. I mean, it's just, you know.
Yeah, and to your question, Michael, about the zoning regulations, you know, a lot has already happened to mitigate the impacts of zoning regulations. And you get, what's interesting about being in a coalition with land conservationists is that there are those, there are places where interests, a lot of interests converge, and then some interests don't converge. So you're not gonna find housing advocates like rabidly like advocating for deregulation like the private sector, because a lot of those regulations actually achieve smart growth principles. So you want reasonable regulation. I mean, I was like you, a major in kind of land use planning at UVM in the environmental studies program, and you know, you want zoning that allows for very high density. And if you're going to allow for very high density, you want to make sure things are being developed well, like quality, you know. So I'm a fan of zoning regulations, but there have been, we haven't come far enough with Act 250, but we've come a long way from where we were when Vermont Natural Resources Council was directly opposing the housing groups in the legislature, and our coalition was like, we've gone through those, you know, uncomfortable times when we're not a coalition. our interests are not on the same page, but mostly we've hung together. And that, you know, Vermont has a funny double-edged sword of, you know, the Housing and Conservation Trust Fund is the reason why the state is so well preserved and so beautiful. And then we are victims of our own success because it means we can't do enough housing, and we don't have enough affordable housing. And then a lot of rich people want to move here because we're so beautiful.
There's a sentiment floating around. It's not actually written in any of the legislation, but it's come up this session in some of the committee hearings where they're debating the different Act 250 and zoning and permitting related legislation. There's kind of this sentiment of, well, what if we have all this money from ARPA and we got to get it out by a certain date? So what if we just hit pause on all these restrictions, pump the money out, build the buildings, and then so it sort of becomes a de facto pilot program, you know, and then we look back and say, well, you know, as someone from the administration said, did the heavens fall? Did the sky fall? You know, and so that's kind of a mindset that's being talked about. Again, I want to be very clear, this is not in any kind of legislation. It's just been in the conversation, but I've also heard it in a number of conversations outside of the committee rooms. And I think that there's a real, I get the sense there's a real push from the administration right now to get this money out the door, and you know, and they really want to kind of get that done. Another thing that's being discussed a lot is we have all these different designated areas, the designated downtowns, designated this, you know, neighborhood development areas. We sort of have kept adding layers to that structure through the years, and so now in the discussions about extending tax credits from the designated downtowns receive out to the neighborhood development areas, which is like the half-a-mile radius outside the designated downtowns, right? And so some of the legislature is saying, why don't we just expand the designated downtown? Like, why are we overlaying another? It's kind of made people in these committees stop and say, well, all of this, why do we do all of this? You know, like so many of it, it's like the old story, people have heard me tell of the meatloaf, you know, the little girl asked her mother why they cut the ends off the meatloaf. And the mother says, well, I don't know, my mother did it. And so then they asked the grandmother, I don't know, my mother did it. They asked the great-grandmother, and the great-grandmother screams, because it wouldn't fit in the pan. Like, all these things, that's the edited version. All these things have a reason when we do them. But then sometimes, you know, they all have good reasons when we do them. But then we reach a point like, I don't know, 2022, when we look at the dynamic that's results, and you know, and it's important sometimes, I think, to pump the brakes and pull the camera back and say, what's the most sensible way of adjusting this? And so there's also, anytime they talk about any attempts at least what I'm gathering is that when they talk about attempts at tweaking Act 250 or changes to zoning or change of permitting, they'll say, well, do we want to really make a change, or do we want to craft some kind of, carve out some kind of a programmatic exemption so that we can try it? You know, I think that, I mean, I'm a brand new Vermonter, but there's an awful lot of folks who were involved, I guess, with this Act 250 development, and it's been our marching orders for so long. Folks get really, legislators especially, really alarmed about making any changes to it. And it's so hard, you know, like Liz said about working a coalition, you have all these different perspectives. And, you know, now for the first time, well, to my knowledge, this is for the first time now we're talking about coming at this issue from the perspective of, well, let's do things directly to increase the ability of middle income folks, or the missing middles, or call it, to make, and why don't we do it from the perspective of bringing down the cost of construction? Because if we bring down the cost of construction, then those missing middle will be able to afford buying a house. That's not permanently affordable housing. It's chipping away at the iceberg from another perspective. And I think that more and more people are trying to think outside of the box, you know, because great, so you get the money to put a building up. Well, the cost of lumber today is something like $1,200 per 1,000 board feet, as opposed to before the pandemic when it was $400 per 1,000 board feet. So, like, you know, it is multi-layered in every single corner and every single facet of it, and I think that to sort of further emphasize Liz's point about the legislators, you know, hearing the value of them hearing people's stories, because the legislation gets so caught up in these concepts and pitches. People go in there, you know, well, I need $5 million, I need $10 million, I need $12 million to do this, that, and the third. And, you know, they give them numbers. They can drown in that. I think they must, because I drown in it, hearing it all day, sitting in all these hearings. But boy, when someone, you know, I was in a hearing for just cause eviction the other day, a legislator stood up and told her story of her experience of homelessness. And people in the room just fell apart, because we forget it's about people. These aren't numbers, these are people. And so the more that they can hear from, you know, more and more voices, and more diverse voices, the better.
Thank you, David. I just want to butt in, since we're creeping right on top of our end time right now. So I wanted just to ask if there are any lingering questions for David or Liz, and then after that, we can briefly talk about moving forward and then conclude the meeting. So are there any questions for Liz and David about what they've been talking about so far? Let's take that as a no. Okay, awesome. So the last thing that I want to talk about is moving forward, the advocacy piece, what we can do with this information that we learned about, and about other affordable housing issues that we're going to talk about at future meetings. So I'm going to try and in a few minutes put a Zoom poll up for you guys to look at, and I'm asking the question, what kinds of activities would you personally like to potentially see at future community meetings and Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition events that we host with the community in regards to advocacy? So the different options that are available for you to select, and you can select more than one, are letter writing or postcarding your representative. Postcarding is actually something that VAHC has done a little bit in the past, but it kind of adds a more personal touch, because you can include a picture of yourself and your home, your family, and kind of add that special intimate touch to your correspondence to your representative. So that's one option. Calling your representative on the phone, possibly some type of workshop or activity to learn how to best write a letter to the editor in your local paper about a certain issue that you care about your personal experience. Group meetings with your representative, a town hall style meeting, possibly inviting representatives into this group, into this community meeting, rather than just having a small meeting over Zoom or the phone or in person with a representative. testifying for a legislative committee, something that Liz had spoken about a few times. And then lastly, an advocacy day at the State House, which would kind of encompass a lot of these activities. So I'm going to quickly launch this poll, and you should be able to see it on your screen. And let me know if you can't and I absolutely clutch this up or not. Or also if you have any questions about the poll or some of the activities. Okay, great. The results are coming in. I did it right. Okay, awesome. So I'll share the results just quickly. And it seems like letter writing, group meetings with representatives, and an advocacy day seem to be popular options. And group meetings with your representative, I went over that just very quickly. But I think that that could be an interesting opportunity just for the coalition to kind of help folks you get together with other community members that are participating here that might live in the same district or the same area to really all together talk to the representative rather than just forcing that conversation onto one constituent, one person to put that on themselves. But yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. And I think that hopefully a lot of these activities we can include at future events and at future community meetings. I see a question from David.
I just wanted to say that I've mentioned here and there about an advocacy day at the State House, and the response I've always gotten as the new guy is, well, we already have such and such day, and we already do such and such day. But you know, the longer I'm in this role, the more I'm just kind of deciding that VAHC will be having its own advocacy day at the State House, and it'll be something new, and it's going to be something different. And I don't know what it'll look like yet, or when it'll be, or what, but and legislators, so I've mentioned it too, were very enthusiastic and very encouraging about doing that. So if you were one of the people who selected that in the poll, keep your eyes peeled.
Thank you, David. That sounds great. So I'll just add a very big up, Liz. I'm sorry, go ahead. I just saw your hand raised.
Thanks. I couldn't find my hand raise button. I was just going to mention that David, along those lines, CBO, I'm sure you know, is doing like these around the state. They have money to put together local housing advocacy groups. And I just thought that might also be something for the VHC to tap into, to like have Jess time and talk about those and let people know somehow where those groups are, because that could be, those groups I'm sure like have a similar goal of meeting with local legislators, that kind of thing, and writing letters. And like Lisa, you were mentioning people in the Valley who have no idea what's going on with their neighbors who don't have housing. And that would be the kind of group that would like do a mini local campaign to raise awareness, I think.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Liz. So as I was saying, just a big thank you to all of you for logging on tonight and joining us. So hopefully we're looking to host these meetings monthly, and we'll have more information out about that on our Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, on our website. If you'd like updates or information or want to reach out to me, I put my email and our website link in the chat box. So feel free to take down that information. And yeah, so we'll definitely post updates. We'll have this recording available through our YouTube page, which is available through our website, for you to view or to share with friends or anyone else shortly. So again, just a big thank you to everyone attending, and thank you to David and Liz for taking the time tonight to talk to everyone about some of the legislative priorities. I look forward to the next meeting, where I imagine, since we brought it up, we'll probably be talking about Act 250 and some other legislative priorities that VAHC has. So I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation, and it was great to talk with you all.
Thank you, everybody. And advocacy is always important, and every voice is important. And I want to add, David, and other folks who may not have ever been to the Capitol personally. It's beautiful. It's very beautiful. On the very top is a symbol of agriculture, and that's beautiful. And one of the things that I can't stress enough, it's important for folks to know, I go there every year except for last year. And being able to walk through those big, beautiful doors, unrestricted, and be able to peacefully and quietly listen in to testimony and being able to join in those committee hearings privately and listening and wandering around the whole Capitol is just a beautiful, unique thing. And I hope it doesn't get lost, because I enjoy every time that I go there, and I never get asked questions. I always feel invited, and I get to chat with various ones. And so thank you. Thank you. And I look forward to the day we all can be at the Capitol. And thank you. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you, Buster. You too. Have a good evening.